Undeserved discrimination. The fight that was fought by an amazing father. Article number 21. Undeserved discrimination. Where is my father's key to the city of Dania, Florida? My daddy, my father, my Abba, and my king. As I said earlier, I write these articles to edify because I'm a writer. I picked up this trade, or I noticed that I had the trade about 25 years ago. I was working at a regular job for this nonprofit organization. They found out that I was a singer and songwriter, so they chose me to write some of their articles while they were in the process of hiring a professional writer. I was completely inexperienced, but I loved to write, so I attempted it. And the few articles that I did write for them, they appreciated. However, in this article is not about me. This article is about our father, my daddy, our Abba. Most of the things I'm writing about was told to me by my daddy and mama. I used to always sit down and ask them questions because I always wanted to know. History was one of the things that I loved. I had a passion for history. So I used to love to sit and just right up under him, looking up in his face and asking him questions. I was always curious. I remember my high school class had to write an essay on who we chose as our African American hero, and I chose my father. My father had a third grade education. He had to drop out of school when he was 9 or 10 years old because he had to take care of his mother. His father, who was from the Virgin Islands, was forced to leave this country and move back to the Virgin Islands because people were threatening to kill him, threatening to hang him. You see, my grandfather, my daddy's father, was a very determined kind of guy and wanted to have his own sharecropping business. But he ran into a lot of opposition. So he had no other choice but to return to the Virgin Islands in fear of his life. So my father had to assume the responsibility of taking care of his mother. He had to leave school, work on a farm to make sure that she was provided for. He was almost 10 years old, I remember him telling me, when he picked his first bale of cotton. He didn't just pick cotton, he picked beans, he picked greens, whatever they were assigned to pick, he would pick these. And this was his first time working on the field, so of course he was very scared. He had no idea what he was doing. I remember him telling me he didn't know what to do. And then another boy who was around 15 or 16 years old taught him everything that he needed to know. I remember when I was young, we had friends that lived across the street from us. And they were close friends. In fact, they were only friends my father allowed us to have. They were also migrant workers on the weekend. They used to get on the bus and go pick beans, whatever. But most of the time they were picking beans. They would go out on the weekend and pick these, and work on the farms. We always wanted to get on the bus with them and go out to the fields with them. It was exciting to us. But my father was against it. I found out much later why he was so adamant about us getting our education and about us not being farm workers. He used to tell us that sharecropping was not a game. When Daddy started picking cotton, he was very inexperienced because he was so young. As I said earlier, there was a young boy who took him under his wings and taught him everything. That young man became Daddy's best friend. And then later on, his cousin, Vinnie D., who was also a teenager but a few years older than my father, came to work in the same fields. The fields that they worked in were about 20 miles from where they lived. So they had to wake up early in the morning at the crack of dawn, sometime maybe around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and start walking in order to reach work in time. They worked every day except Sunday. My father said he remembered making about maybe what it was the equivalent to about $1 a day, nowadays. And sometimes they would be paid in just goods. They would just pay them in beans and potatoes and whatever. Any kind of vegetable. So they would come home with food most of the time. And when they were paid, $1 a day, they would pay that in coins. They had to work all day, taking only one few minutes break out of the whole day. Sometimes it would be 10 minutes break, sometimes it would be 5 minutes break, sometimes it would be 15 minutes break. But it was only one break a day. My father was born in 1913. So I calculated this to be about around the year of 1921 and 22. Daddy told me one day when he was about 14 years old, he and his cousin Vinny D had to work late. It was nighttime when they were through working, so the only route they could take to avoid trouble was through the fields. Somehow they got lost and wandered off course and wandered right by a juke joint. That's what it's called. It's a bar, but it's called a juke joint. They heard music playing and sneaked up to the window of this juke joint and peeked in. He loved music and he loved to sing, so when they heard this music, they were very young and did not realize that they were walking up to a juke joint that was off limit for them. When they looked into the window to see what was going on, one of the white guys in the bar saw them and immediately took off behind them. So they started running. Daddy said they ran for hours trying to avoid being caught by these men because they knew they would be hung if they got caught. So they ran hard. Daddy said maybe around 15 miles steady. Finally, they made it to the house, to my daddy's house, and they ran up the steps. The white man my father and his cousin worked for was very concerned about them because they weren't home yet. So he was out looking for them. Just at the moment this man rode up in his horse, the man who was chasing them rode up on their horses also, saying all kind of explicits and calling my daddy and his cousin all kind of terrible names. Then the man that they were working for said, "What's the problem with these boys? These boys belong to me." Daddy said he'd know if they were caught. If they would have been caught, they would have been hung. They would have been killed for sure. We're talking about rural Georgia, 1921 to 23. So we know. They had no other choice but to go another route to work. That route took them further from work and took longer for them to get there. My daddy worked on this farm until he was about 17 to 18 years old. Then he volunteered for the Army. He volunteered to go into the military. It was his first time away from his mother. He had no other brothers and sisters, so he had no one else to help him take care of his mother. He said he remembered when he had to leave his mother, he was so hurt. And he made a vow that he would learn a trade and would work very hard to do better for himself and to take care of his mother. My father was always a fighter, strong man, a lot of tenacity. Not only was he strong, he was very smart. He was wise and did not even have wisdom on the educational level like we would think today. He had street smarts. When he was in the military, he became an amateur boxer. Him and the other group of the men there used to box to entertain the other soldiers. My father also loved to sing, so they formed a singing group, a gospel group. I think my father said they were named, if I can remember correctly, I think he said they were called the Legionnaires or something. My father's job in the military was in the maintenance department. So this is where he learned to be a plumber. He was also trained to be a sharpshooter. Later on, they trained him in the artillery field. So one day he was transferred from the base. I think that base was somewhere in South Carolina, he told me. I believe I have that correctly. So he was transferred from that base to a base in Spokane, Washington. Now, my father, as I said earlier, was never away from his mother. Now, when he was in the base in South Carolina, or Georgia, or wherever it was, he used to go home to visit his mother on his leaves. So he used to take a leave, I think my father said once a month, and he would go to his mother to make sure that he would get everything that she needed and take care of her for that weekend. So now he's being transferred all the way across the country to Spokane, Washington, from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast of this country. He told me he loved that base, that military base he fell in love with. He said it was so different from where he was. There was no discrimination, no segregation. All the soldiers were considered one. He said it was very different from where he was from. He told me he felt more relaxed. He just felt free. While he was in that military base in Spokane, Washington, he met my mother. My mother had just moved to Spokane, Washington from Enid, Oklahoma, to become a teacher of economics in one of the high schools there. They met each other while Daddy was on leave. My father's gospel group was singing at a function for some sort of church bazaar. So my mother says she instantly fell in love with him. Mama told me he was the best looking man she had ever seen. Mama said when she heard his voice, she said she thought she was listening to an angel. So she immediately fell in love. Now keep in mind, my mother was a prolific singer. She had the voice of an angel also, and I'm not just saying this. So she said she loved the way he was very kind, very gentle, but also very rugged, very manly. And she was not used to that. My mother was sort of raised on an Indian reservation in Oklahoma because she was a Choctaw Indian. So all of her experiences from childhood was Indian experiences. So she had never met a man like my father. She said loved the way he dressed. So they began to date. They started to date. And after about a year, Daddy asked her to marry him. Daddy told me that after he'd met Mama, he couldn't think of anyone else. Now, these are his words. He fell in love with her instantly. As I said, my mother was half Choctaw, half Indian, Irish, and black. She was a beautiful woman, had hair almost down to her knees. She was well educated. She graduated from high school when she was around 15 or 16 years of age and entered college as a straight A student. I remember her telling me this. Daddy only had a third grade education. So my mother taught him how to read and how to write. She helped him with his business both physically, technically, mentally, and in every way, while she was having his children. My brother Eddie was born in Spokane, Washington. Right after my mother and father got married, she became pregnant with Eddie. So Eddie was born in Spokane, Washington. Then Daddy was discharged from the military, and they moved back to Georgia, where his mother was. Then his mother, my grandmother, got sick and had to be moved to a hospital in Miami, Florida. Of course, he moved his family to Miami to be close to her. His family consists of then my sister Callie, my brother David, my brother Tyrone, and Eddie. It was only 4 children at that point. My mother had 3 children before she married my father. My father had 2 other girls, but their mothers were somewhere in Georgia. So he moved his family to Miami, Florida, to be close to his mother, who was very sick in the hospital. I think the hospital was somewhere around Liberty City area in Miami. While they were in Miami, my brother John and my sister Billy Joe was born. So they were in Miami a few years. Then 1 year later, my daddy's mother died in the hospital. One of his relatives, my father's relatives, cousins or something, told him that there was some work in Dania, Florida. So my father picked up everything and moved to Dania, Florida. My daddy's business had not yet caught on then, so he took a job in a canning plant in Dania. I know the canning plant very well. Most people in Dania, Florida, around my age know about this. There was a very small little apartment right next to the canning plant. So my father moved in. And when I say small little apartment, I'm talking about a one-room apartment, one bedroom, and the other living room part of the apartment they had to convert into bedrooms for the children. Very small place. Then I was born. Daddy worked for a few years in the canning plant. And then while he was working in the canning plant, he met Mr. K. Simon, a white guy from Maine or Massachusetts. He took my father under his wings. He liked my father a lot, and he became my daddy's best friend. K. Simon heard about this big mansion up on the hill west of Dania, Florida, that was being auctioned. They were cutting up the mansion up into sections and selling it to whomever. So Mr. K. Simon was a rich guy. So he bought a section of the mansion for my daddy. He also bought this section of land for the house to be placed on. We then moved to what we call Camp Blanding. It was called Camp Blanding, I believe, because the military base was there a long time ago, somewhere around 1800s. It was a blessing for the family because Mama started to farm there. And then she opened up a grocery store and a restaurant, small grocery store and a restaurant. Then Daddy's business began to grow with the help of Mr. K. Simon. I can remember being about maybe 7 or 8, and me and my sister Billy Joe would work in the store. At that time, my brother Carter was around 5 or 6. And then Frank and Larry were born a few years later. Daddy would work so hard because being a plumber back in those days was grueling work. Everything was done manually. My daddy did not have machines. He only had picks and shovels. Mr. K. Simon helped him accumulate the tools that he needed. He would sometimes work until 10 o'clock at night. I remember he would be so tired, he would drag himself into the house. On Sunday, we would always go to church because my daddy was an elder in the church. The church was called the Church of God in Christ, right down the street from where we lived. We were still young when Daddy started teaching us to harmonize and sing together. Mama was a piano player and a beautiful singer. She had an opera-like voice. But she did not have a piano at the time, so she wanted a piano. So my daddy talked to K. Simon about it. And I don't know how long it took, but one day, a great big transfer truck backed up in the yard. Mr. K. Simon bought this big truck full of things he had bought from an auction. In all of that stuff was a piano. And that's how my mother got her first piano. Most of the time on Sundays, after church, around the evening time, after we've had our dinner, my father would take us in the living room, sit us down. My mother would play the piano. My father would teach us parts. I remember this explicitly. In that truck that K. Simon bought was also our first television set. Sets of encyclopedias, sets, all kind of books, old coins, all kind of fur coats, dishes, pots and pans, instruments, guitars, drums. It took several weeks to unpack that truck. I don't remember how long, but I know took a long time. My father was the first African American plumber in that part of Florida. He was one of the first black-owned businesses in that area. And he owned a few pieces of land in Dania, Florida. It was brought to my attention that he actually owned the lot where the Dania Park is located and donated it to the city. Of course, we don't have any way of actually certifying this because no documents were signed and exchanged. My mother and father both told me this story. The story is that my daddy was working for this white family across, we used to call it across the track in Dania. And the father of this family became very close to my daddy. And they became friends. So this man deeded the land that my father gave to Dania. And that's the land that the Dania Park is on. Somehow it was placed in the hands of the city. There's no certification as to how it became, but my father and my mother adamantly spoke to me about this. Mama said Daddy gave it to the city for the park to be built on because my daddy wanted a safe haven for the children. That is the story. I write this because Father's Day is coming. My daddy was an amazing man. He was very articulate. He could figure out things you would never expect him to be able to figure out. He got his GED later on in his life with the help of my mother and went on to become a plumbing inspector when he passed away, with my mother's help all the way. My father had 15 children in his immediate family and a few children from other women. He took care of us all like a champion. He was an amazing father. I'm not focusing on his mistakes. I'm focusing on his accolades. This article is written out of respect for my father. While I don't glorify him, I have the utmost respect for him and his tenacity, his strength, his natural abilities, and his unfailing determination in spite of the discrimination that he suffered. I tell everyone when they ask, where do I get my strength and determination? I tell them I had the greatest of role models, my father and my mother. My daddy groomed us to be entertainers, entrepreneurs, singers, musicians, performers. He groomed us because he never had the opportunity to become what he really wanted to be. He threw us the ball, and it was up to us to run with it. He and Mama were next to perfect when it comes to their dedication as parents. We are who we are because of God and because of them. Obstacles was just something they jumped over and kept going. They had it much harder then than we have today. Was my father perfect? No. He was not a perfect man. He was also very strict. You know how it is. When you're kids, you don't like the strictness. So I'm not talking about perfection here. I'm talking about dedication. Just like my mother always said to me, your father is an amazing man. No matter what anyone says, that man, Mr. Eddie Lee Cornelius Sr., is the epitome of what a father, a husband, and a man should be, with flaws and all. How I wish I would have paid more attention to that than I did. But my question today is, where is my daddy's key to the city of Dania? He definitely deserves it. We have to give honor where honor is deserved. We must be respectful to the people who are the pioneers of this thing we call life. So where is my father's key to the city of Dania? That's my question. It's okay, Daddy. I know what you meant to us. You may not have the key to the city of Dania, the accolades you deserve, you definitely deserve, but you will always be in our hearts, honored and never forgotten. when you were too tired to even sleep, when you always made sure we ate before you took a bite, when you made sure we had clothes and shoes to wear while you struggled to make ends meet. You made sure we went to school and insisted we get good grades because you wanted the best for us. While you toiled and worked in the hot sun from the sweat of your brow so that we could lay our heads down at night in peace. When you made sure we were resting before you lay down to sleep. I remembered how you toiled to make sure we always had a good Christmas. You were a great father, a good husband, good friend, and a good God-fearing human being. You suffered, my Father, undeserved discrimination, and you took it like a champion. Thank you, Daddy. I will always be grateful, and I will always honor you. Love always, my Father. May you rest in heavenly peace. From your children, Callie Gatewood Cornelius, David Cornelius, Tyrone Weston Cornelius, Eddie Jr., John, Billy, Rose, Carter, also known as Gideon, Larry, Frank, Vinnie D., Bertram, Lionel, Eddie Vivian, and Betty Jean, and Tyrone Cornelius. We love you, Daddy. We would not be who we are today if it were not for you. Honor your father and mother, so that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee.